The voicemail came in while I was kneeling in my garage, trying to bleed the brake line on my old F-150. I'd been putting it off for 3 weeks, 63 years old and still doing my own brake jobs. My son thinks that's stubborn. I think it's honest. You either know how a thing works or you don't. I've always preferred to know. My phone was propped against a coffee can on the workbench. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I read the screen. Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and answered. The deputy's voice was young, practiced. The kind of calm that comes from a script, not experience. Mr. Fowler, this is Deputy Reyes with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. We've received a complaint and we'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience. What kind of complaint? I asked. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, he said, filed by your daughter-in-law. I set the phone down against my ear and looked at my hands. Grease under the nails, a small cut on my thumb I hadn't noticed until just then. My daughter-in-law, Connie. I said, I'm sorry. Can you say that again? He did, word for word. The sun was coming through the garage window at a low angle, catching all the dust in the air. I remember watching it hang there, suspended, while the deputy explained that the complaint alleged I had been systematically withdrawing funds from a joint account I shared with my late wife, an account that Connie claimed my son had co-ownership of, and that I had been doing so to hide assets before an anticipated legal dispute. I hadn't taken a single dollar from that account in 11 months. I'd barely touched it at all. It was the account my wife and I had opened together in 1987 at a Bank of America branch that didn't exist anymore. And after she passed, I'd kept it open because closing it felt like losing her twice. Mr. Mineta, Fowler, the deputy said, are you available to come in this week? I can come in today, I said. There was a short pause. Yes, that works. After I hung up, I stayed in the garage for a few minutes. The brake job wasn't done. The coffee can had a crack in it I'd never noticed. A barn swallow had been building a nest in the corner of the window frame for 2 weeks, and I've been watching it come and go every morning. It was there now, pulling a piece of straw into place, indifferent to everything. I went inside, washed my hands twice, and called my son. He didn't pick up. My son's name is Brett. He's 38. He works in commercial real estate out of Scottsdale. He married Connie 6 years ago, in a ceremony that cost more than my first house. I wore the suit I'd worn to his mother's funeral, and I thought about that the whole day. Connie is 41. She's sharp, organized, and has a way of listening that always made me feel like I was being evaluated. I don't say that with hostility. I say it because it's accurate. She's a paralegal, which I mention not to explain anything, but because it will matter later. I'd never had a real conflict with her. The occasional tension, yes. The kind that comes when a woman marries into a family and finds that the father-in-law still owns the house where holidays happen. But nothing I'd have called a problem. Nothing I'd have called a problem. Nothing I would have predicted leading here. When I arrived at the sheriff's substation, Deputy Reyes turned out to be about 25, with a clipboard and the slightly apologetic energy of someone who knew this conversation was going to be uncomfortable. He walked me through the complaint. Connie had submitted documentation showing a series of withdrawals from the joint account, 17 of them over 8 months, totaling just under $42,000. I told him that was impossible. I had a Medicare supplemental billing issue that had required 2 calls to resolve in February, and other than that, I hadn't touched the account. He asked if I could provide records. I told him I had every statement since 1987 in a fireproof box in my office. Not because I expected to need them, because my wife was an accountant, and she taught me that paper is the most honest thing a person can produce. I drove home and pulled out the file. The withdrawals were there. I could see them in the most recent statements, staring back at me in clean bank fund. The amounts. The dates. I looked at the first one, October 14th, my wife's birthday. I sat with that for a moment. I had been in Flagstaff on October 14th. My granddaughter's school play. I have a photo on my phone. Me and her, backstage. Her in a butterfly costume with one wing already coming unstapled. Me in a fleece that my son always says looks like a fishing lure. I know the exact timestamp on that photo because I'd sent it to my sister in Tulsa, and she'd texted back within minutes. October 14th, 6:37 p.m., Northern Arizona. The withdrawal had cleared at 4:15 p.m. at an ATM in Tempe, 48 miles away. I didn't call my son again that night. I'd learned over 63 years that the best decisions are made after sleep, not before. My wife used to say I had the emotional metabolism of a tortoise. She meant it as a compliment. I went through the rest of the withdrawals the next morning with a yellow legal pad, which is how I do all thinking that matters. Each one got a line. Date, amount, time, location from the ATM data printed on the statement. Then I went through my phone. Photos with timestamps, gas receipts I'd photographed because I keep track of mileage for tax purposes, emails with delivery confirmation, church attendance records. I'm on the building committee, and we log attendance for insurance reasons. Every single withdrawal had a corresponding location where I was documented to be somewhere else. Not one of them overlapped with my actual geography. I called my accountant, a man named Phil, who has been doing my taxes since my wife and I owned the hardware store. I explained the situation without emotion. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Lyle, I'm going to need you to come in." Phil's office smells like old coffee and carpet cleaner, and he had his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead when I arrived. I laid out the statements. He looked at them for a long time. "These ATM transactions," he said. "The card used, is this your primary card?" "No," I said. "I lost that card in March. They sent a replacement. What happened to the old one?" I thought about it. I'd reported it lost through the automated system. I'd assumed it was gone, dropped somewhere, maybe in a parking lot. I'd never really tracked it down. "I don't know," I said. Phil leaned back in his chair. "Someone has your old card." It wasn't a question. "And they knew the PIN," I said. "Did you ever write it down?" I hadn't. But my wife had. She kept a small address book, the old kind, cloth cover, alphabetical tabs, in the left drawer of the desk we shared. It had our passwords, our PINs, our account numbers. She'd set it up before password managers existed, and we'd never moved away from it. That book was still in the desk. Anyone who had been in my office could have read it. I need to stop here and tell you something about the months after my wife passed. Connie was the one who helped me with the paperwork, the estate, the account notifications, the subscription cancellations. There's an enormous amount of administrative work and grief that no one prepares you for. She was thorough. She was capable. She spent several afternoons in my office, at the desk where that book sat. I had been grateful. I called my attorney that afternoon. Her name is Margaret, and she has represented my family for 20 years, through the sale of the hardware store and through my wife's estate. When I finished explaining, she said, "Have you spoken to your son?" "Not yet," I said. "Is that intentional?" "Yes," I said. She understood without needing more. "All right. Here's where we start." Margaret outlined it precisely. First, notify the bank immediately. Flag every transaction and freeze access to that account. Second, file a counter report with the sheriff's office with documentation before Connie's complaint moved any further into the system. Third, request the ATM footage from the bank for each transaction date. Fourth, preserve everything, phone records, receipts, timestamps, and organize it into a chronological file. I went to the bank the same afternoon. The branch manager was a woman named Eileen, 10 years younger than me, with a kind of no-nonsense efficiency I appreciate in people who work with money. I explained the situation calmly. I showed her the statement and my legal pad of cross-referenced dates and locations. She pulled up the account. Her expression shifted in a small but readable way. "Mr. Fowler," she said, "the card used for these transactions, it was reported lost in March?" "Yes. It was never deactivated." I looked at her. "The replacement was issued," she said carefully, "but the original card number remained active. That shouldn't have happened. I'm going to flag this immediately." She made a note. Then she looked at me over her reading glasses. "We have ATM camera footage for all branch locations. For a fraud investigation, we can pull that." "I'd like a formal request filed today," I said. She nodded. "I'll get you the reference number before you leave." Brett called that night. I was on the back porch eating leftover soup and watching the neighbor's dog patrol the fence line the way he does at dusk. I let it ring once before I answered. "Dad." His voice was flat, defensive in the way it gets when he already knows something hasn't gone right. "Hi, son. Connie said you went to the bank." "I did." A pause. She said this is getting out of hand." "What exactly is out of hand?" I asked. She's concerned about you. We both are. Since Mom died, what have I been, Brett? He didn't finish the sentence. He exhaled instead. She filed that complaint because she was worried about the money disappearing. The money, I said, has been disappearing from an account that only I have authority over, using a card I reported lost 7 months ago, at ATMs I was documented to be 40 or 80 miles away from. That's what's been happening. Silence. Brett, I said, and I kept my voice level because that's what the moment required. Do you know anything about this, Dad? That's a yes or no question. No, he said. No, I don't, and I don't like what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, I said. I'm asking. There's a difference. He said he needed to talk to Connie. I told him that was his business. After we hung up, I sat on the porch until it was full dark, listening to the neighbor's dog finally settle down. The thing about 63 years is that you've had time to watch a lot of situations develop. You start to recognize the shape of a thing before it fully forms. Not from cynicism, from pattern recognition. And the pattern I was looking at didn't feel like a wife worried about her father-in-law's financial health. It felt like a woman positioning herself ahead of something. I opened my notes app and made a list, not of feelings, of facts, of the things I didn't yet know but needed to. Phil called me the next morning. He'd spent the evening cross-referencing the withdrawal amounts against the estate filings from my wife's passing. Lyle, he said, 4 of these amounts match exactly to partial disbursements in the estate. Penny for penny. What does that mean? It means whoever was making these withdrawals had access to the estate documents, he said. They knew the exact figures. I thought about Connie in my office. The estate paperwork spread across the desk. The address book in the left drawer. Phil, I said, can you put that in writing for me? Already, Emmy said. That afternoon, the bank called. The ATM footage had been pulled for 3 of the closest branch locations. Eileen said they could share it with law enforcement directly, or provide copies from my attorney. I called Margaret immediately and asked her to request all of it. Margaret's voice carried something I hadn't heard from her before, a particular kind of focus. Lyle, this is bigger than a fraud report. I know, I said. If the estate numbers match, this isn't someone opportunistically using a lost card. This is deliberate. This took planning. I didn't respond right away. Outside my window, the swallow was still working on that nest. Patient. Piece by piece. Then we plan accordingly, I said. Margaret filed a formal response to the county sheriff's complaint that same day, including my documentation package, the legal pad cross-references, the time-stamped photos, the gas receipts, the church attendance records, Phil's written analysis. She hand-delivered it and requested the investigating deputy be by end of week. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. 6 words. Back off before this gets worse. I forwarded it to Margaret. I forwarded it to Deputy Reyes. Then I took a photograph of my phone screen with my other camera, printed it at the drugstore, and put it in the file. Brett showed up at my house 2 days later. Unannounced, which is unusual for him. He came in the way he used to as a kid, through the garage, without knocking, and stood in the kitchen doorway, looking like a man carrying something too heavy for his posture. She didn't tell me, he said. I gestured to the table. He sat. What didn't she tell you? I asked. About the card. About any of it. He rubbed his face with both hands, and I saw my father in him then, which I don't often see. I found some things when I went through her home office this morning. He set a folder on the table. Inside were printouts. Our old account statements, going back 14 months, with certain figures circled in red pen, and clipped to the inside, a handwritten note with my pen. In handwriting I recognized. My wife's handwriting. Brett looked at the table. She was copying things from your office. During those visits after Mom died, I looked at the note for a long time. My wife's careful, precise numbers, written the year before she passed in the book she'd kept since we opened our first account together. Did you know she was doing this? I asked Brett. No, Dad. His voice cracked on the word just slightly. No. I believed him. I believed him because I've known his face for 38 years and because guilt and shock don't look the same. What I was looking at was shock. There's more, he said. He pulled out another printout, a text chain between Connie and a name I half recognized. a man she'd worked with before she left her last firm. The texts were clinical, deliberate, discussing timing, discussing the account balance, discussing what the complaint would accomplish, triggering a guardianship review process, which, if it moved fast enough, could result in me being declared financially vulnerable and my accounts temporarily managed by a court-appointed representative. Temporarily is a flexible word. I read it twice. She needed the complaint to stick long enough, Brett said. The ATM withdrawals were meant to look like you were confused. Moving money you didn't remember moving. Making a 63-year-old widower look like he was losing his mind. I set the papers down flat on the table. My hands were steady. That surprised me. Brett, I said, I need you to give everything you found to my attorney today. I already called her, he said. I called her on the way over. The county sheriff's financial crimes unit opened a formal investigation within the week. The ATM footage confirmed what the timestamps already suggested. The person using my card was not me. The bill was different. The gate was different. Investigators identified the individual as a former colleague of Connie's, the same man from the text chain, who turned out to have a record in Nevada involving elder financial fraud. Connie had been careful in most respects. She hadn't been careful enough about the texts, about the folder, about the fact that she'd left my son's name on a joint account she'd never mentioned to him. In trying to build a structure designed to hold, she'd built one with too many visible seams. The complaint she'd filed against me was dismissed. The investigating deputy, Deputy Reyes, the young one with the clipboard, called to tell me personally. He sounded relieved in the way people do when paperwork and reality finally align. Margaret filed a civil suit. The case against Connie moved into the criminal system separately, which I'll leave to the courts to complete. Brett retained his own attorney for proceedings related to the marriage. I told him that whatever he decided, I wasn't going anywhere. I know, he said. He sounded like he needed to hear. Confirmed anyway. The account, the one my wife and I opened in 1987, I finally closed. Not from bitterness. It was time. I transferred the remaining funds and opened a new account in my name only at a credit union 12 minutes from my house. The woman who helped me set it up complimented my handwriting. I told her I learned it from my wife. The address book is still in the left drawer. I've thought about moving it. I haven't. There's something I want to say to anyone listening who's around my age, or who has a parent who is. The thing no one tells you about grief is that it opens you up. It makes you want to believe the people around you are there because they care, and most of them are. But that openness is real, and some people read it as access. I gave Connie my trust because she came in during the hardest year of my life, and I was grateful. Gratitude is not a weakness. It is not evidence of diminishment. I was not confused. I was not vulnerable in the way she needed the system to believe. I was a man who had just lost his wife, and I let someone into the room where her handwriting still lived in a drawer. That is a human thing, not a failure. What protected me wasn't suspicion. It was the habit of documentation. The gas receipts, the time-stamped photos, the legal pad, the phone records, the fireproof box. My wife had spent 40 years building that habit into our household, and when I needed it, it was there. People will sometimes tell a story that puts you in the margins. They'll use your stillness, your grief, your age, your silence, as evidence of something that isn't true. The answer isn't volume. The answer is sequence, a clear, documented, irrefutable sequence of where you actually were and what actually happened. If something in the story sounds familiar, if you've watched a narrative form around you that doesn't match your own memory of events, I want you to hear this. Start writing things down, not defensively, just accurately. Paper doesn't grieve, and it doesn't speculate, and it doesn't require anyone to take your word for anything. It speaks on its own. If you've been there, or if you're watching someone you love navigate something like this, leave a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. These stories, the quiet ones, the ones that happen in kitchens and driveways and sheriff substations, they matter. Someone out there needs to hear that a timeline can hold when everything else is shaking. We share stories like this every day on this channel, real ones. Stay with us. I've had time to sit with all of it now. The sheriff's call, the legal pad, the folder Brett laid on my kitchen table, the moment I realized that someone had been standing in the room where my wife's handwriting still lived in a drawer and had chosen to use it. What I keep coming back to isn't the anger. I'm past the anger. What I keep coming back to is the mechanism of it. how it was designed to work. Because if I hadn't had those gas receipts, if I hadn't photographed every timestamp out of a habit my wife built into me over 40 years, if I had been the kind of man who assumes that people who show up during grief are showing up for the right reasons, the story Connie was building would have had no counter-narrative. The system would have moved at her pace, not mine. That's not a comfortable thing to sit with. It means the outcome wasn't inevitable. It was earned, receipt by receipt, phone photo by phone photo. And it could have gone the other way just as easily. Here's what I've come to understand about cause and consequence, not as philosophy, but as lived fact. The things that protect you in a crisis are almost never the things you assembled for that crisis. They're the things you assembled out of simple discipline, long before trouble showed up. My wife kept that address book, not because she expected betrayal. She kept it because she believed in knowing where things stood. I kept those gas receipts, not because I expected to need an alibi. I kept them because I've always tracked mileage. The protection was a byproduct of integrity, not strategy. Connie was strategic. She planned across months. She had a contact with experience in this kind of thing. A script, a timeline, an institutional mechanism she understood from her years as a paralegal. And she still lost, not because I outmaneuvered her, but because the truth had better documentation. That's what I want people to take from this. Not that you should be suspicious of the people who help you in hard times. Most of them deserve your trust, but that you owe it to yourself to stay lucid. To keep records not out of paranoia, but out of self-respect. To understand that your name, the meaning of it, the trust attached to it, is worth the small discipline of writing things down. I also want to say something about Brett, because his part in this matters. He could have stood behind his wife. He could have convinced himself that the easier version of events was the true one. Instead, he went through that home office on his own. He showed up at my garage door carrying something he hadn't asked to carry. That took a kind of moral courage that doesn't make the news but holds families together. I didn't raise a perfect man. I raised an honest one. And that turned out to be enough. The account my wife and I opened in 1987 is closed now. The new one has only my name on it. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it the way you'd say that a chapter ended, fully, cleanly, at the right time. The swallow finished her nest, by the way. I noticed it the morning after everything was resolved. Sitting there in the corner of the garage window frame, complete, exactly where she'd been building it all along. Patient, piece by piece. I thought that was about right.